The Italian place on Charles Street had small candles in green glass jars, and snow was falling slow against the windows. Caleb Mercer sat at a corner table in a navy shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a glass of water sweating beside his hand. He had come because his late wife's mother had asked him to. He had not planned to stay long. The door opened. A woman in a charcoal coat walked in, scanned the room, and froze. It was Reeve Ashby. 5 days ago, she had signed the paper that fired him. She did not move. Caleb looked up, took 3 full seconds, and then recognized her too. He did not stand. He did not look away. "I didn't arrange this," he said quietly. "If you want to leave, I understand." 4 months earlier, the kitchen in the small house in Somerville smelled like cinnamon and warm milk. Caleb stood at the counter, braiding his daughter Junie's hair into a fishtail, working from memory. The girl was 7, small for her age, and she sat on a high stool with her chin on her hand. "Did Mom braid like this?" she asked. "She braided better. I'm catching up. Is she still here?" "She's here. And the way you laugh." He kissed the top of her head, packed her lunch into the blue insulated bag, and drove her to school in the old Subaru. The defroster wheezed. The radio played softly. He told her he would pick her up at 3. He always picked her up at 3. At Thorne and Vale Engineering, on the 22nd floor, Caleb sat in a cubicle near the window. His coworkers called him the guy who never raises his hand. He had turned down the senior lead promotion 3 times in 18 months, and people had stopped asking why. The truth was simple. Senior leads flew out to bridge sites for weeks at a time, and there was no one else to braid Junie's hair. Imogen Sato, the quality assurance director, knew more than the rest of them. She had worked with Caleb at Bridger Hale in San Francisco 6 years before, when his name had still been on the public registry. She had promised the day he walked into Thorne and Vale that she would never say a word. That afternoon, a manila folder landed on his desk. The label said, "North Shore Viaduct, Secondary Load Check." Holden Price was the lead engineer of record. Caleb was being asked to read behind him, the way a teacher reads behind a tired student. He opened the binder. He read for 2 hours without moving. On page 37, his pencil stopped. The resonance coefficient under sustained Atlantic winter wind had been calculated to 1 decimal place too few. Off by a full order of magnitude. He took the binder home. He waited until Junie was asleep on the couch with the television playing low, then opened his old laptop and ran the simulation himself. The results came back in 40 minutes. The bridge would not collapse on opening day. It would crack along the primary girder after 2 winters, lose dynamic load capacity inside 5 years, and become unsafe under a sustained Category 3 storm somewhere in year 7. 50,000 vehicles a day were projected to cross it. He printed the report. His finger hovered over the send button on the company portal for a long time. Sending it meant stepping back into a light he had walked out of 3 years ago. He thought about Junie. He thought about his wife. He pressed send. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for an hour without moving. A month later, in the corner office on the 40th floor, Reeve Ashby ran a board meeting that would decide her year. The North Shore bid was the largest contract Thorne and Vale had ever chased, $4 billion. 2 miles of cable-stayed deck across the inner harbor. If they won it, she kept her chair. If they lost it, the board had already drafted a vote to install Holden Price as interim CEO inside 6 months. She was not an engineer. Her father had been one of the great structural minds of his generation, and he had had a stroke in his office 2 years ago. At the age of 68, she had inherited the seat before she had finished mourning him. The arrangement her father left behind was unspoken but ironclad. Holden was the technical brain. She was the face. She hated that arrangement. But she had not yet found a way to break it without breaking the company. Every quarter the board reminded her, in small ways, that she was a placeholder. That afternoon, Caleb's report arrived in Holden's inbox, with Imogen Sato copied. Holden read it twice, closed his door, and called Caleb up to the 39th floor. "This is the math of a sophomore," he said. sliding the report back across the desk. "Withdraw it, or I'll withdraw you." Caleb did not pick up the report. "The wind data is from the National Weather Service. The math is correct. Withdraw it." "No." Holden looked at him for a long moment, the way a man looks at a fence he has not noticed before. Then he smiled and said, "I will remember you wanted this." A week later, the report was gone from the internal system. The audit trail showed it had never existed. Imogen Sato, working late and running a routine cross-check between the QA backup server and the main system, noticed the gap. She pulled a copy of the deleted file from the redundant archive, printed it, and locked the printout in her office safe without telling anyone. She did not yet know what she was going to do with it. She only knew that engineers who lost their warning reports tended, in her experience, to need them later. Junie fell on her roller skates and broke her wrist. Caleb took 2 days off. In the elevator, Holden leaned toward Reeve and murmured, "Some employees can't commit. That's the kind you shouldn't trust on the big projects." Reeve nodded and made a note in her phone. She did not ask the name. She did not have the bandwidth to ask the name. The board meeting that morning had run 2 hours over. That night, in his unlit office on the 39th floor, Holden opened a private email account on his personal laptop and typed a short message. The recipient line read Garrison. The body was 4 lines. The internal review caught the load discrepancy. "I have suppressed it. Confirm the steel order proceeds as agreed." The reply came back within minutes. A single line, no signature. "Whatever you need to do, do it. We'll cover." Holden closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a moment, looking out at the lights of the harbor. He had not started this for the 8%. He had started it because Garrison had offered him a seat on their board for the year after North Shore opened. The kickback was the sweetener. The seat was the prize. He had calculated, the way he calculated everything, that the bridge would not fail until he was already gone. 5 days before the candles in the green glass jars, Holden made his move. The night before the final North Shore bid hearing, an anonymous email landed in the inboxes of every member of the State Procurement Committee. Attached was a document under Caleb's name. It was his original warning report, but the language had been rewritten. Slurs against the company, vulgar threats against named partners, references to political corruption that did not exist. Nothing he had ever written. The document had been crafted with the kind of malice that only an insider could plausibly stage, and the metadata had been carefully spoofed to point back toward Caleb's home network. The committee canceled the hearing by midnight. The $4 billion contract slipped to the second-place bidder by morning. By 6 a.m., the news was on every business desk in Boston. By 8, Holden had called what he labeled a disciplinary review. 14 managers in a glass conference room on the 38th floor, Reeve at the back, watching, with 2 unread emails from J.P. Morgan flashing on her phone screen. Holden read the case as if reading a verdict. The leaked email had originated from an IP block in Somerville, where Caleb lived. Caleb had previously authored an unauthorized warning report on the same project. The conclusion was self-evident, Holden said. Sabotage from a disgruntled engineer who had been passed over for promotion 3 times. Caleb stood at the front of the room. He asked to see the email headers. He asked to see the server logs. He asked to see the IP trace. In full, not summary. Under investigation, Holden said. Not for distribution at this time. Caleb asked whether the company had verified the metadata against the QA cross backup. Holden said the QA backup was not relevant to a personnel matter. Reeve had a call with J.P. Morgan in 20 minutes. The single-page brief in front of her bullet pointed everything Holden had just said. She had already lost a $4 billion contract that morning, and her board chair had texted her twice. She signed. A young project manager near the wall laughed and said, "Loud enough to carry? He won't even look up." Real sneaky type. The room laughed with him. The laughter was not loud, but it was the kind that fills a room because nobody chooses to stop it. Caleb looked up. For the first time in the entire meeting, he raised his eyes and looked at Reeve, directly, without anger. He held the look. She felt something turn in her chest, a small wrong note she could not name. And then her phone lit up and she looked away. Later, lying in bed unable to sleep, she would remember exactly the angle of his head and the absence of any plea in his eyes. His phone buzzed on the table. The school. Junie had thrown up at lunch. Holden saw the screen and smiled. Hope she didn't inherit her father's judgment. The room went quiet. The laughter died in their throats. Even the project manager who had spoken first looked down at his notepad. There was a line, and Holden had stepped over it, and everyone in the room understood that they had been standing on the wrong side of it for the past 15 minutes. Imogen Sato stood up at the side of the room. She did not speak. She walked out, and she shut the door behind her hard enough that the glass wall hummed for 2 full seconds afterward. Reeve watched her go. For the first time that morning, Reeve felt a cold, quiet pull at the base of her skull, the kind of feeling she had learned to ignore in business school. Caleb picked up his cardboard box. Inside it, a coffee mug Junie had painted for him at a birthday party, a framed photograph of his wife, and a structural slide rule his father had given him at his graduation. He walked out. In the elevator, alone, he pressed his thumb against his palm, hard, and then let it go. He drove straight to the school. Junie was small and pale on the nurse's bench, and she put her arms around his neck and did not ask why he was there in the middle of the day. He buckled her into the back seat. He sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and watched the snow start to fall on the windshield. The school parking lot was empty. He thought, for a long-stretched moment, about driving north and never coming back to that office. His phone vibrated. A text from a number he did not recognize. "I know who you are. Don't let go of that report." He looked at it for a long time. Then he started the car and drove home. 2 days later, Imogen Sato met him at a small cafe in the North End, the kind of place where the espresso machine was older than the owners. She set a thick folder on the table between them, slid it halfway across, and kept her hand on it. "I have kept your past quiet for 3 years because you asked me to," she said. "This is not about you anymore. 50,000 vehicles a day." He pulled the folder toward him. Inside, the original signed and time-stamped version of his warning report. A QA cross-backup of the server logs from the night the anonymous email was sent, showing the message had originated inside Thorne and Vale, not from Somerville. A photocopy of the side contract for steel girders from a Chinese supplier, signed by Holden Price as approving engineer, with a notation of an 8% commission routed through a Cayman account. Imogen tapped the last page. 16 million. That's what your report would have cost him. Caleb closed the folder. "Why now?" "Because last night I drove past the North Shore site and watched them stage the first pylon forms. Because if I wait until that bridge is up, I will spend the rest of my life knowing." He took the folder home. He waited until Junie was asleep. Then he opened the closet in the spare bedroom and pulled down the laptop he had not used in 3 years. The structural analysis software was still installed. The license was still active. The password was Junie's birthday. He worked until 2 in the morning. He did not just confirm his original report. He went deeper. He pulled the bid submission file Holden had sent to the procurement committee and ran the load model on it directly. The safety factor on the primary deck girder, in the version that had been submitted, was 1.05. The American Society of Civil Engineers minimum for that bridge classification was 1.25. Holden had pushed it under the line to fit a cheaper steel. Caleb checked the metadata on the submission file. The last user to modify and save it was logged as Reeve Ashby. 11:47 p.m., the Thursday before the bid hearing. He sat back in his chair. He did not know if she had read what she was signing or not. He suspected she had not. He suspected Holden had walked into her office at midnight with an iPad and said, "Just a graphics update. Sign here." He printed 3 copies of everything. He locked one in his own safe, mailed one to a private box in his name, and sealed the third in an envelope addressed to himself and dropped it in the mail. Postmarked evidence was older than the internet and harder to erase. That same evening, Delphine Ashby called her daughter and told her in the voice that did not allow refusal, that she had arranged a dinner for Saturday. The son of an old college roommate, Charles Street, 8 o'clock. Reeve had not slept properly since the disciplinary review. She agreed because arguing was more tiring than going. Imogen Sato, on her drive home from the cafe, pulled over on a side street and made a call. "I gave him the file," she said into the phone. "He'll do what he does. I am sorry I let him sit in a cubicle for 3 years. He wrote a Norman Medal paper while you and I were still reading textbooks." The voice on the other end did not answer for a long moment, and then said only, "Tell him I knew. Tell him when this is finished." So now there were candles in green glass jars, and Reeve Ashby was sitting down across from Caleb Mercer because pride would not let her stand up and walk back out, and because if he had brought her here to threaten her, she wanted to hear it from his mouth, not through a lawyer. The waiter brought bread and olive oil. They ordered without looking at each other. Reeve picked the cheapest pasta on the menu out of an instinct she did not examine. Caleb ordered what he always ordered when his late wife had picked the restaurant. For 3 minutes, neither of them spoke. The candle flickered in its green jar. A waiter in the next aisle uncorked a bottle of something old, and the cork made a small, soft sound. She tried first. "Have you sued the company yet?" "I'm not suing the company." "What are you doing then?" "Waiting for the company to come find me." She did not understand the answer. She turned the wine glass in her fingers and thought about leaving. Her phone began to buzz on the table. Once. Then again. Then a third time. She glanced down, then up, then down again. The texts were from Holden. The State Department of Transportation had issued a notice. A surprise structural review of the North Shore submission had been scheduled for Monday morning, before any pylon concrete could be poured. Holden was telling her not to worry. He was reassuring her in 3 separate messages, each one slightly more emphatic than the last. She read the 3 reassurances in a row and could feel, through the screen, that he was lying. She had run a company for 2 years. She knew the texture of a man who had stopped sleeping. Caleb watched her face. He set down his fork. "Page 94, he said. "The safety factor on the primary deck girder. 1.05. Do you know what that number means?" She lifted her eyes. "What are you doing?" "It means a sustained category 3 storm of 9 minutes will start micro-cracking the girder. It means in 5 years that bridge loses dynamic load capacity. It means I am the only engineer in your company who has run the actual model on the actual file you submitted." "The submitted file. Not the file Holden showed your board last Tuesday." Her mouth opened slightly. "How do you know that number?" "Because I wrote the original. Before Holden changed it. Before you signed the change at 11:47 on Thursday night last week." The color left her face in a measured way. From the temples down. She remembered the iPad. She remembered Holden saying, "Just a graphics update. Just a chart refresh." She remembered her own thumb pressing the signature pad without really looking at the screen because she had been on her 4th coffee and her 7th meeting of the day. She thought, with a clarity that made her stomach tighten, that her father would have read every page. Caleb laid 2 20s on the table and stood up. He did not raise his voice. "You are not the reason I lost my job. You are the signature. Holden is the reason. And the bridge is going to be the reason 50,000 people die if no one stops it." He walked out into the snow. The waiter started to come over to ask if everything was all right, and then read the air at the table, and did not. She sat alone for a long time. The candle in the green jar burned down a 1/4 inch. She opened the corporate portal on her phone, navigated through 3 security gates, and pulled up the submission file. Page 94. Safety factor. 1.05. Her hand started to shake. She pressed it flat against the table until it stopped. She called Imogen Sato. Imogen picked up on the first ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone. "I'm at the office in 20 minutes, Imogen said. "Bring nothing. I'll have everything." At 6 the next morning, Reeve sat across the desk from Imogen on the 18th floor. Imogen pushed a folder across, identical to the one she had given Caleb 2 days earlier, with 1 added page on top. The page was a brief biography. Caleb Mercer, Principal Structural Engineer. Bridger Hale Group, 2014 to 2022. American Society of Civil Engineers. Norman Metal, 2019. Carquinez Straight Replacement Span. Lead Structural Designer, 2018. Reeve read the page twice. She lowered her forehead onto her hand. I fired a Norman Metal engineer in 40 seconds, based on a one-page summary. You fired him because you were too tired and too afraid to read, Imogen said. Stand up. We have 18 hours before that DOT review. The door opened without a knock. Holden Price stood there in his coat, snow on his shoulders. The QA cross backup he had been told never existed had pinged him an alert at 5:52 a.m. He smiled. A meeting I wasn't invited to. Curious. Reeve stood up. Her voice did not shake. Holden, you are on personal leave as of right now. Voluntary. Before I have to do something else. You don't have evidence. I have your initials on a side contract. I have a server log that doesn't match your story. I have a metadata trail on the bid file. Get your coat. Holden looked at Imogen. Imogen did not look back. He left without raising his voice, which Reeve recognized as the more dangerous reaction. She drove herself out to Somerville. She did not call ahead. She parked at the curb in front of a small clapboard house with a snow-dusted hedge, walked up the path, and knocked. Caleb opened the door in a flour-stained apron, sleeves rolled. Behind him, a small girl in a striped shirt looked up from the kitchen counter. You're the lady from the spaghetti restaurant, Junie said. Are you here for breakfast? Reeve had no answer ready for a child. Caleb stepped onto the porch and pulled the door mostly shut behind him. I need your help, Reeve said. Monday morning, the DOT reviews the North Shore submission. If I fail that review, my board removes me by Friday. If Holden runs the room, he buries it. I cannot stand in front of those reviewers and explain a resonance model. I need you next to me. Caleb looked at her for a long, plain moment. I am not standing next to you. I am standing in front of 50,000 people who are going to drive across that bridge. You happen to be on the same side of the room as them today. That is the only reason I will be there. She nodded once. It was the answer she deserved. She walked back to her car. As she opened the door, her phone rang. The caller was Tobias Wren, a junior engineer in the North Shore Project Group. His voice was high and breaking. Mr. Price just pulled up at the laydown yard. He's burning the steel delivery log in a barrel. I'm filming through a windshield. I don't know what to do. Reeve dialed Caleb back. He said, stay on the phone with the kid. Tell him to keep filming and back away. I'll meet you there. He went inside. Asked Eleanor, his late wife's mother, to come over and stay with Junie. She lived 10 minutes away and did not ask questions. He grabbed a coat. He did not bring an umbrella. By 11 that night, 3 of them stood at the edge of the North Shore laydown yard in a hard, slanting snow. Caleb. Reeve. Imogen. Tobias Wren was crouched behind a stack of containers, still recording, his breath a small white cloud near his collar. In the center of the yard, Holden Price was feeding paper into a 55-gallon drum that had been turned into a fire barrel. The flames were short and orange against the dark. He looked up. He did not seem surprised. A field trip. At this hour, Caleb walked past him without speaking. He went straight to a stack of steel girders that had arrived from the dock that afternoon, knelt down, and put the flashlight from his phone against the stamped marking on the flange. Q345B, GB/T, 1591, 2018, Chinese Standard. The contract had specified A709, grade 70W American. He photographed it. Imogen filmed him. Tobias, behind his container, pushed all 3 of his clips up to the QA cloud backup. The upload bar finished while Holden was still talking. Holden took something out of his coat. It was a USB drive. He tossed it underhand into the fire barrel. The plastic shell warped within seconds. No evidence, he said. No case. Caleb stood up and brushed snow off his knee. You burned a USB. I have a copy in my safe. Imogen has a copy in QA. Tobias finished uploading 2 minutes ago. The DOT will have it by 8 a.m. Holden turned to Reeve. He smiled the way he had been smiling at her for 2 years. Little Reeve, you don't know what your father did to keep this company alive for 20 years. You think those contracts came clean. Her shoulders pulled back half an inch. She did not answer. Caleb stepped between them. He did not raise his voice. He almost lowered it. Holden, stand still. Or walk toward the patrol car that's 6 minutes out. I don't care. But stop talking to her. Holden took a step backward. He did not mean to. His body moved on its own. For 3 full seconds he stared at Caleb, at the way Caleb's shoulders sat, at the way Caleb had read the steel marking in the dark in a single glance. You aren't a Vale engineer, Holden said. It was almost a whisper. Caleb did not answer. Imogen, near Reeve's shoulder, spoke quietly. He signed the structural calculations on the Carquinez replacement span in 2018, the bridge that stood through the 2021 earthquake without a crack. He left the field after his wife died in the partial collapse of a Garrison Group bridge. He has not forgiven a wrong bridge since. Reeve turned and looked at Caleb. He was running his thumb along the diameter of a bolt, as if measuring the pulse of a living thing. The patrol car came up the access road with its lights turning slowly, the snow flashing red-blue-red across the steel. 2 officers got out. Holden was detained for questioning over the destruction of project documents. He went without resistance. His attorney would have him out by morning, but it was enough to open a case. Back at the office at 3 a.m., Caleb sat at a workstation in the QA bay and opened the Thorn and Vale structural analysis system to prepare the demonstration for the DOT review. He found something he had not expected. There were 2 backdoor accesses to the calculation server. One was Holden's, traced through the 8% kickback. The other was external. The IP signature pinged out to a colocation facility in Reston, Virginia. The account name was scrubbed, but the certificate chain led to one place, Garrison Group. The wrong bridge was not corruption. It was sabotage. A competitor had used Holden as a hand inside the building to push Thorn and Vale into building a structurally compromised $4 billion bridge. When it failed 5 years out, Garrison would win the rebuild contract, plus the entire city's restoration work, plus the state of Massachusetts' confidence. Hundreds of millions, conservatively, and a body count nobody at Garrison would ever sign for. Caleb sat very still. Reeve, on the other side of the room, saw his face change and did not ask. The room at 8 in the morning held 20 people. The Massachusetts DOT review team led by Marisol Vega, the permitting director, a woman with 22 years in the field and a reputation for asking exactly the question you did not want her to ask. 5 members of the Thorn and Vale board, including Delphine Ashby, who had not taken off her coat. Holden, who had been released on his attorney's recognizance 4 hours earlier, in a different suit, sitting beside a lawyer Reeve had never seen before. Tobias Wren, looking as though he had not slept. Imogene Sato, in the chair closest to the projector. Caleb was not in the room yet. Reeve walked in without slides. She had a stack of printed pages and a small black flash drive. She did not sit. She put the pages down on the table and rested both hands on top of them. Before the DOT begins its review, I need to reintroduce a member of our technical team. Caleb came in through the side door. He wore a navy shirt without a tie. Holden stood up. This man was terminated last Friday for a security violation. His presence in this room is illegal. I am formally objecting on behalf of company governance. Reeve did not turn her head toward Holden. She spoke directly to Marisol Vega. That termination was issued on falsified evidence. The QA cross-backup of the server logs demonstrates that the email cited as cause was generated internally, not from Mr. Mercer's residence. I rescinded the termination at 5 o'clock this morning. Caleb Mercer is a special technical contractor of Thorn and Vale. Effective then. Holden tried again. He got 2 words out. Caleb spoke without turning. Holden, you will want to hear this part. The first half is about the bridge. The second half is about you. The room went silent. Holden's lawyer pressed a hand on his sleeve, and Holden sat down. The set of his shoulders did not match the suit anymore. For 22 minutes, Caleb walked them through it. He did not raise his voice. The original safety factor of 1.27, demonstrated against the original bid documentation. The submitted factor of 1.05, demonstrated against the metadata stamped file Reeve had signed at 11:47 Thursday night. The dynamic load model run live on his laptop on the projector screen, showing micro-cracking of the primary girder inside 2 winters of sustained Atlantic gale. The Chinese girders with the wrong stamp, photographed last night against a measuring tape. The 8% commission, traced through 3 layers of shell companies to a Cayman account that bore Holden Price's middle name as its registered alias. Tobias Wren's footage, played without commentary, the firelight orange on Holden's face inside the small screen. Marisol Vega did not interrupt once. She wrote in a small notebook. Twice she underlined something. Then Caleb pulled up the last slide. There is a second access point in the calculation server, he said. It is not Mr. Price. It belongs to Garrison Group. The certificate chain leads to their colocation facility in Reston, Virginia. They were planning for this bridge to fail in year 5. They were planning to win the rebuild contract. We estimate the planned rebuild value at $600 million. There is a body count component to that plan that nobody at Garrison would have signed for in writing. Marisol Vega stood up. Her voice was level. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation suspends the North Shore Viaduct construction permit effective immediately. The FBI field office will be contacted within the hour. Mr. Mercer, I would like a full copy of your evidentiary file by close of business today. Delphine Ashby turned and looked at Holden across the table. She had known him for 20 years. She had been at his wedding. My husband trusted you, she said. For 20 years. Holden's voice cracked. This is a fabrication. Mercer staged this. The metadata can be spoofed. Caleb did not turn his head. I did not stage you, Holden. You signed your own name on 112 emails to Garrison. Security stepped in. 2 officers in suits walked Holden out from his chair. As they passed Caleb, Holden stopped. He leaned in close. He spoke just under his breath, just loud enough for Caleb to hear. You think your wife died in an accident? Asked Garrison. Caleb did not move. He did not breathe for a count of 3. Then he looked through the glass wall into the corridor and saw Junie, who had asked Eleanor to bring her to her father's office that morning, waving with both hands. He walked out of the conference room. He picked her up. She was getting too big to be carried, but she let him. Reeve found him a half hour later in a hallway off the executive floor. Junie had fallen asleep against his shoulder. He sat on a low bench and did not look up when Reeve sat down 1 seat away. He spoke first, his voice flat and slow. My wife crossed the Carquinez Strait Bridge on April 23rd, 2022. Garrison's Bridge. A secondary girder fell. She was one of 3 people who died. The investigation said maintenance failure, contractor error, no criminal cause. I told the National Transportation Safety Board I did not believe it. They closed the file anyway. I left the field because I was afraid. Not of designing a bad bridge, of what my hands would do if I ever found out it was on purpose. Reeve did not say I'm sorry. She knew the shape of those words, and she knew they would not fit here. You don't have to look alone, she said. I'll look with you. Not because I owe you. Because Thorn and Vale was used as a weapon against my city. And I am the CEO. He turned his head a fraction. He did not answer right away. Junie shifted against his shoulder and made a small noise in her sleep. And he adjusted her so that the strap of her backpack did not press into her cheek. All right, he said. 2 weeks later, the FBI opened a federal investigation that ran in 3 states. The bid submission, the kickback structure, the Garrison server backdoor, and the Carquinez incident were all rolled into a single case. Holden Price, on the second day of his interview, confirmed that Garrison Group had been funding him since 2019. He named 2 senior vice presidents and 1 chief operating officer at Garrison, who had personally directed the Thorn and Vale infiltration. The Carquinez forensic re-examination found that the secondary girder had been replaced during the 2021 maintenance cycle with substandard alloy stock. The maintenance contractor had been a Garrison subsidiary with overlapping board membership. A grand jury was convened in the Northern District of California within 10 days. In the boardroom at Thorn and Vale, on a gray morning 2 weeks after the DOT meeting, Reeve stood in front of her board. Her mother was in the third chair from the left. The chairman had asked her to bring a resignation letter as a gesture of good faith. She did not give him the letter. She put it back in her bag. "I signed a man's termination in 40 seconds, Reeve said. "I did not read the file. I trusted Holden because I was afraid of proving I am not an engineer. That fear almost killed 50,000 people. I am not asking for forgiveness from this board. I am proposing a structure that prevents this from happening again. If you vote no, my resignation is in my bag and I will hand it over." She proposed 3 things. A full audit of every active contract above $100 million, conducted by an independent firm with no prior relationship to Thorn and Vale. Imogen Sato into a created seat as Chief Quality Officer, reporting directly to the board, with veto power on contract submissions. And a Chief Engineering Advisor position, part-time, remote, with veto power on all major bridge projects. The advisor's name she would not announce publicly. The board would understand why. Delphine spoke for the first time in months, without prepared notes. "I agree." The chairman looked around the table. He looked at Reeve. He looked at the unopened resignation letter sticking out of her bag. All in favor, 11 hands went up. The vote was unanimous. The next afternoon, Reeve drove out to Somerville. She did not call ahead. Junie opened the door, looked her up and down, and said, "You came back. Is your dad here?" Junie nodded gravely and went to get him. Caleb came to the porch. He did not invite her in. The cold pressed white at the edge of her breath. "I came to apologize," she said, "officially, on the record, to you, not to a board." He looked at her for a moment. "I do not need your apology," he said. "I need you to never sign something you have not read. The 50,000 people who are going to drive across whatever bridge you build next do not care whether you are sorry." Reeve stood without moving. She felt the words land all the way through her chest. Junie, in the front room behind her father, stopped playing with her wooden blocks. The whole house went still for a measured count of 30. "I won't," Reeve said. He nodded once. "Give me a week." A week later, he accepted the Chief Engineering Advisor role on the conditions he set. 3 days a week. From home. No board meetings. Veto power on every bridge project over $50 million. The salary equaled the difference between his cubicle pay and the principal engineer rate over the past 3 years, plus a college trust for Junie. Reeve did not negotiate. North Shore Viaduct was redesigned. New safety factor, 1.32. Material, a 709 grade 70W. American mill, traceable from heat lot. Tobias Wren was promoted to lead engineer on the rebuilt project. Imogen Sato was named Chief Quality Officer, the seat she had been owed for 10 years. Holden was indicted on federal charges. Garrison Group was facing simultaneous suits in 3 states, 6 weeks after the boardroom apology. On a Saturday afternoon, Reeve drove out to Somerville again. She had not called ahead. She had a small white box of butter cookies in the passenger seat. She had bought them clumsily because she had never bought cookies for anyone. And the woman behind the counter had wrapped them in twine, in a way Reeve did not know how to untie. Junie opened the door. "It's the CEO lady. Are you coming in?" Reeve looked up over the girl's shoulder. Caleb, in a gray sweater with flower on the cuff, gave her one small nod. They sat on the back step. The yard had a single bare maple and a bird feeder. Reeve put the cookie box between them. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I have never had to ask for something that was not work." "You don't have to ask," Caleb said. "Just sit. Junie is making real cookies inside. Yours don't measure up." She laughed. It came out small and surprised, almost nothing. It was the first time he had seen her laugh. Junie came outside with a slightly burnt cookie on a paper towel and presented it solemnly to Reeve. "It's the best one I've ever had," Reeve said, and ate the entire thing. "You're lying," Junie said. "Yes. But I still ate it. Junie nodded as if this were acceptable, and went back inside. Reeve glanced through the kitchen window and saw, on the shelf above the stove, a framed photograph of a woman with brown hair and a wide, unguarded smile. She did not ask the name. She nodded to the picture, the way a guest nods to the host of a house, and turned back to the yard. Before she stood up to leave, she pulled a sealed envelope from her coat pocket and laid it on the step between them. There were 3 people at Garrison who were not indicted. I hired a private investigator on my own dollar after the federal team closed their slice. The names are in here. You decide what to do with them. When you decide, he looked at the envelope for a long time. Then he picked it up and put it in the kitchen drawer behind him without opening it. When Junie is older, he said, I'll open it when I am steady enough to. She nodded. She walked back to her car. She did not drive away immediately. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine off for a full minute. Then 2. She picked up her phone and called her mother. I am not coming to your gala next week. I have something else. She hung up before Delphine could answer. She did not start the engine yet. Inside the kitchen, Caleb pulled a step stool up to the counter, and Junie climbed onto it, and they began to measure flour for the second batch of cookies. Through the window, the headlights of Reeve's car stayed on. 2 soft circles of warm light against the cold blue winter dusk. She sat there a little longer. Then, eventually, she drove home.